Aliens asked for harmless pets. Human children brought the galaxy's deadliest cubs. The invitation that changed everything. The message arrived on Ambassador Maya Chen's desk at exactly 3 in the afternoon, because even aliens understood the importance of proper timing. The holographic seal glowed with the combined emblems of 37 different species, each one representing a civilization that had achieved faster than light travel without destroying themselves in the process. Maya read the invitation twice, then a third time, because surely she was misunderstanding something. The Galactic Assembly requests each member species to send representatives of their young to the Peace Summit, along with something that exemplifies the gentle nature of your civilization. The words floated in the air like a challenge wrapped in diplomatic language. Maya knew what this really meant. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 5 years ago, and most species still viewed them as the galaxy's newest problem children. Too violent, they whispered in their various languages. Too unpredictable. Too dangerous. This summit was a test, plain and simple. The established civilizations wanted to see if humans could raise their young to be peaceful members of the galactic community. They wanted proof that humanity had evolved beyond its warrior past. Maya leaned back in her chair and smiled. They wanted to see something gentle and harmless from human children. She would give them exactly that, though perhaps not in the way they expected. 3 days later, Maya stood at the entrance of the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, watching the morning sun paint the mountains gold. Dr. Sarah Martinez met her at the gate, her weathered hands telling stories of decades spent healing broken creatures. Sarah had built this place from nothing, turning 50 acres of wilderness into a sanctuary where the impossible happened daily. Ambassador Chen, Sarah said, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who had found their life's purpose. I have to admit, your call was the strangest request I've ever received, and I once had someone ask if they could teach a bear to drive. Maya followed Sarah down a winding path through the facility. The air was filled with sounds that shouldn't exist together. The playful barks of wolf pups mixing with the contented rumbles of bear cubs, the sharp cries of eagles overhead blending with the soft chirps of smaller creatures. This place was organized chaos, a careful balance of wild and tame that shouldn't work but somehow did. Our program is unique, Sarah explained as they walked. We take in orphaned predator cubs who wouldn't survive in the wild without their mothers. The children who work with them aren't just caretakers. They become family, teaching these animals how to be wild while loving them completely. They turned a corner, and Maya stopped breathing for a moment. In a large enclosure, a 12-year-old girl sat cross-legged on the ground, while a mountain lion cub practiced pouncing on her shoelaces. The girl, completely unconcerned about the fact that she was playing with a future apex predator, gently redirected the cub's attention to a proper toy. That's Maria, Sarah said. She's been raising Storm since he was 3 weeks old. His mother was killed by a car and he was too young to survive alone. Maria bottle-fed him every 2 hours for the first month. She taught him to hunt using toys and games. In 6 months, he'll be ready to return to the wild and Maria will have to say goodbye. Maria looked up and waved, her dark hair catching the sunlight. Storm immediately noticed the change in her attention and butted his head against her arm, demanding pets. She laughed and obliged, scratching behind his ears in just the right spot to make him purr like an oversized house cat. How many children are in the program? Maya asked, already knowing this was exactly what she had been looking for. 4 primary caretakers, Sarah replied. Each one has formed a special bond with their animals. It's not something we planned. The connections just happened naturally, the way the best things usually do. They continued their tour, meeting each child and their extraordinary companions. There was 10-year-old Marcus, who had somehow convinced a trio of gray wolf pups that he was their honorary pack member. The pups followed him everywhere, responding to his hand signals and voice commands with an eagerness that spoke of complete trust. Marcus explained their pack dynamics with the seriousness of a professor teaching graduate students, while the pups tumbled over each other trying to get his attention. 9-year-old Lily worked with a black bear cub named Honey. Despite the bear's intimidating future size, Honey was currently about as threatening as a large, furry toddler. Lily had taught him to solve complex puzzles for treats, demonstrating a level of intelligence that most people didn't associate with bears. Honey could open latches, sort objects by color, and even use simple tools to reach food placed out of reach. The youngest was 8-year-old David, whose companion was perhaps the most surprising of all, a leopard cub named Shadow. Leopards were solitary hunters, notorious for their independence and fierce territorial nature. Yet Shadow followed David around like a devoted dog, responding to subtle verbal cues and hand gestures with an attentiveness that bordered on telepathic. "Though, children understand something most adults forget," Sarah said as they watched David and Shadow play an elaborate game of hide-and-seek. "Love isn't about control or dominance. It's about trust and respect. These predators could hurt the children, easily, even as cubs. They choose not to because the bond is real." Maya watched as Shadow found David hiding behind a log, pouncing on him with claws carefully sheathed. David laughed and rolled with the cub, their play fighting looking dangerous to outside eyes but clearly a joyful game between friends. This was what the galaxy needed to see. Not humans controlling nature through force, but humans and nature choosing to trust each other. "Dr. Martinez," Maya said slowly, "how would you and the children feel about taking a trip? A very unusual trip?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "How unusual are we talking?" "The kind that involves meeting beings from other worlds and possibly changing how the entire galaxy sees humanity." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching her young charges work with their animal companions. Each child had learned that love meant eventually letting go, that their job was to prepare these magnificent creatures to return to the wild where they belonged. It was a heartbreaking kind of love, the purest kind, expecting nothing in return except the knowledge that they had made a difference. "Ambassador Chen," Sarah finally said, "I think these kids have been preparing for something like this their whole lives. They just didn't know it yet." Maya smiled and pulled out her communication device to start making arrangements. The Galactics. Assembly wanted to see something harmless that represented human youth. They were about to learn that humans had a very different definition of harmless. After all, what could be more harmless than children who had convinced the most dangerous predators on Earth to love them? As she watched Maria teaching Storm a new hunting technique using a feather on a string, Maya thought about the upcoming summit. The alien delegates would expect human children with finger paintings or musical instruments. Instead, they would meet children who embodied humanity's greatest strength, the ability to see potential friends where others saw only danger. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. Maya could hardly wait to see their faces when 4 human children walked into the summit, with Earth's apex predators padding alongside them, not as controlled beasts, but as beloved companions. The other species thought humans were dangerous because of their warrior past. They were about to learn that humans were dangerous for an entirely different reason. They could make anything, even death itself, love them back. First contact goes sideways. The orbital station. Harmony floated in space like a giant's jewelry box, all crystalline surfaces and impossible angles that hurt to look at directly. It had been designed by committee, which meant it offended no one and impressed everyone equally. The human transport looked like a tin can next to the station's elaborate architecture, but Maya preferred function over form any day of the week. Inside, their ship, the most unusual diplomatic delegation in human history, was preparing for first contact. Maria sat cross-legged on the floor, Storm draped across her lap like a house cat who had forgotten he weighed 60 pounds. The mountain lion cub was purring, a deep rumble that vibrated through the ship's deck plating. Nearby, Marcus was mediating a dispute between his wolf pups over who got to investigate a particularly interesting air vent. "Remember," Maya addressed the children, "the aliens we're about to meet have never seen Earth predators before. Some of them might be scared at first." "Why would they be scared?" Lily asked innocently, while Honey, the bear cub, attempted to figure out how to open a sealed container of snacks she had specifically secured to prevent this exact situation. "Honey wouldn't hurt anyone. He just wants treats and belly rubs." Dr. Martinez hid a smile behind her hand. The children genuinely couldn't understand why anyone would fear their companions. To them, these were just their friends who happened to have sharp teeth and claws. The fact that those teeth and claws could tear through steel was just an inconvenient detail. David was the calmest of all, sitting quietly with Shadow the leopard cub practicing their communication exercises. The boy would make a small hand gesture, and Shadow would respond with a specific behavior. Touch nose to hand, circle once, sit, lie down. It was like watching a dance where both partners knew every step by heart. The docking alert sounded, and everyone prepared for disembarkation. Maya had tried to warn the station about what they were bringing, but the universal translator had apparently struggled with the concept of emotional support predators. The message that got through mentioned something about small Earth companions, which was technically true but missed some important context. The airlock cycled open, and they stepped into the station's receiving area. The first alien they encountered was a Vrixi, a species that looked like someone had given anxiety a physical form and taught it to walk upright. The Vrixi took one look at Storm padding alongside Maria and made a sound like a tea kettle having an existential crisis. This attracted the attention of other beings in the area. A group of Zalani, crystalline creatures who prided themselves on logical thinking, immediately formed what could only be described as a geometric panic formation. Their leader started emitting harmonics that the translator interpreted as alert. Alert! Danger! Small humans have been captured by Earth predators. No, Maria said patiently, as Storm decided this was a perfect time to stretch, displaying his impressive set of claws. Storm is with me. We're friends. See? She demonstrated by scratching under Storm's chin, making him purr louder. The Zalani's harmonics shifted to what might have been confusion, or possibly a mathematical error. The concept of befriending a predator apparently didn't compute in their logical framework. Things escalated when Marcus's wolf pups spotted something interesting across the hall. As a pack, they immediately wanted to investigate, with Marcus jogging to keep up. The sight of 3 wolf pups moving in hunting formation, even though they were just curious about a decorative fountain, caused a delegation of aquatic hydrons to retreat so fast they left puddles of their breathing fluid on the deck. They're really jumpy, Lily observed while Honey had discovered that his claws made interesting sounds on the station's metal flooring and was now composing what he probably thought was music, but sounded more like a horror movie soundtrack. Alright. The time they reached the main concourse, word had spread. Aliens of every shape and size lined the walls, keeping what they clearly thought was a safe distance. Some species Maya didn't even recognize were peering around corners, their various sensory organs focused on the human children and their companions. Then Council Leader Zixa Theta arrived, and the atmosphere changed from nervous to electric. Zixa Theta was from one of the oldest spacefaring species, beings who had achieved interstellar travel when Earth's ancestors were still figuring out fire. They looked like what would happen if storm clouds gained consciousness and decided to judge everyone. Ambassador Chen, Zix Theta's voice resonated through the translation field, carrying undertones of disapproval that needed no translation. You were asked to bring something that exemplifies the gentle nature of your civilization. We did, Maya replied calmly. These children represent humanity's greatest gift, the ability to form bonds across species barriers. You brought apex, predators, Zix Theta stated flatly. Our databases classify these creatures as extremely dangerous. David stepped forward, Shadow matching his pace perfectly. The 8-year-old looked up at the towering alien without a trace of fear. Shadow's not dangerous. He's learning to be a good leopard. I'm teaching him and he's teaching me. We're family. To demonstrate, David sat down right there on the concourse floor. Shadow immediately curled around him, protective and affectionate in equal measure. The leopard cub's eyes never left Zix Theta, but there was no aggression in his gaze, just calm assessment. The silence was deafening. Then from the crowd of watching aliens came the heavy footsteps of someone pushing through. Commander Krell of the Torgan warrior race emerged, 7 feet of scaled muscle and battlefield scars. The Torgans were the only species that other races feared more than humans, and Krell looked like he had personally earned that reputation. But instead of hostility, Krell's expression showed something that might have been recognition. He approached David and Shadow slowly, then did something that made every being in the concourse gasp. He knelt, bringing himself down to the child's eye level. "Small warrior," Krell said, his voice like grinding stone. "How did you earn this? Predator's loyalty." David brightened, apparently unaware that he was talking to one of the most feared military commanders in the galaxy. "I didn't earn it. We chose each other. When Shadow's mom died, he was scared and alone. I was the one who stayed with him every night so he wouldn't be afraid. Now he stays with me so I won't be afraid either." Krell was silent for a long moment, his reptilian eyes moving between David and Shadow. Then he did something even more shocking. He extended one clawed hand slowly, carefully toward Shadow. The leopard cub sniffed the offered hand, then, after a moment's consideration, rubbed his head against it. "The child speaks truth," Krell announced, his voice carrying across the concourse. "This is not control. This is not dominance. This is trust between warriors." Maria seized the moment, standing up with Storm beside her. "We'd like to show you all something if you're willing to learn. Our companions aren't just animals we've tamed. They're individuals with personalities, intelligence, and choices. They choose to be with us every day." The crowd of aliens stirred, curiosity beginning to overcome fear. A young Vrixie, braver than its elder, crept forward slightly. Storm noticed the movement and tilted his head, ears forward in interest rather than aggression. Maria placed a gentle hand on Storm's shoulder, and he settled, though his eyes tracked the young alien with feline fascination. "Maybe," Dr. Martinez suggested to the assembled beings, "we could move to a larger space where the children can properly demonstrate what they've learned." Zixatheta seemed to be having an internal struggle between protocol and curiosity. Finally, curiosity won. The Grand Assembly Hall has been prepared for cultural demonstrations, though I doubt any of the other delegations were expecting this. As they moved toward the hall, Maya noticed something interesting happening. The aliens were still keeping their distance, but it was no longer purely fear. Some of the younger members of various delegations were watching the children and their companions with what looked like wonder. A group of Zilani were harmonizing in what their translator suggested was academic excitement, apparently discussing the mathematical improbability of what they were witnessing. Marcus's wolf pups had decided that walking in formation was boring, and were now play-fighting as they moved, tumbling over each other while Marcus laughed and tried to keep them roughly heading in the right direction. Several alien children, or what Maya assumed were children based on size, were watching with obvious delight. The universe had expected human children to bring finger paintings and folk songs. Instead, they had brought proof that humans could convince death itself to curl up in their laps and purr. The real demonstration hadn't even started yet, and already Maya could see minds beginning to change. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity really was. Not a species that conquered through force, but one that conquered through sheer, stubborn, impossible love. When predators become teachers, the Grand Assembly Hall stretched before them like a cathedral, built by beings who had never heard of modesty. The ceiling dissolved into holographic stars, the floor reflected everything like still water, and the seating arrangements rose in spirals that defied normal geometry. It was meant to inspire awe and humility. Instead, it became the galaxy's most unlikely classroom. Maria stood in the center of the vast space, Storm beside her, both of them dwarfed by the architecture but somehow holding everyone's attention. Representatives from 37 species filled the seats, their various forms of eyes, sensors, and perception organs all focused on the small human girl and her mountain lion companion. Storm's mother taught him to hunt in the wild, Maria began, her young voice carrying clearly through the translation fields. But she died when he was just 3 weeks old. Without her, he would have died too. That's when I became his teacher, and he became mine. She produced a puzzle box from her bag, its complexity obvious even from a distance. Multiple sliding panels, rotating sections, and hidden compartments made it look more like a security device than a toy. Storm's ears immediately perked forward, his entire body shifting into focus mode. Watch how he thinks, Maria said, placing the box on the floor. Storm approached it with the careful precision of a scholar examining an ancient text. He sniffed first, gathering information. Then one paw came up, claws carefully sheathed, to test a sliding panel. When it moved, his purr rumbled through the hall. The alien delegates leaned forward as Storm systematically worked through the puzzle. He would try something, evaluate the result, then adjust his approach. Within minutes, he had 3 compartments open and was working on the 4th. Zelani were harmonizing in excitement, their crystalline bodies ringing with frequencies that suggested academic ecstasy. Earth predators aren't just hunters, Maria explained while Storm worked. They're problem solvers. They have to be smart because they hunt alone. Storm can remember puzzle solutions for months. He can track scents that are days old. He can even recognize himself in a mirror, which shows self-awareness. A young Vrixie, braver than its elders, raised what might have been a hand. Does the predator understand your words? Maria smiled. Storm, come here, please. The mountain lion immediately abandoned the puzzle and padded over to her. Sit. He sat. Show them your paws. Storm lifted one paw, then the other, displaying his impressive but carefully controlled claws. Now go get your favorite toy. Storm trotted to their supply area and returned carrying a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. The sight of the apex predator carefully carrying a toy like a beloved treasure caused a ripple of something that sounded like laughter from several species. Across the hall, Marcus had set up an obstacle course with his wolf pups. But this wasn't just physical training. It was a demonstration of complex social cooperation. The 3 pups worked together, one moving obstacles while another guided the third through the course. They communicated through subtle body language, small sounds, and an understanding that went deeper than training. Wolves are different from solitary hunters, Marcus explained to his growing audience. They think as a pack. Every decision is made together. Watch what happens when I give conflicting signals. He gestured for the pups to go left while verbally commanding them to go right. The pups stopped, looked at each other, had what appeared to be a quick conference, then all 3 sat down and looked at Marcus with expressions that clearly said, "Make up your mind, human." The Torgan delegation, Commander Krell's warrior species, rumbled with what their translators suggested was approval. One of them, younger than Krell with fewer battle scars, spoke up. They maintain pack discipline even under confusing orders. This is advanced tactical thinking. It's more than that, Marcus said earnestly. They're not just following orders, they're making decisions based on what's best for the pack. Sometimes that means ignoring me if they think I'm wrong. Watch this. He placed a treat in a location that required the pups to navigate a potentially unstable platform. Marcus commanded them to get it, but the lead pup, after investigating, turned back and barked at Marcus in what was clearly disagreement. The pup then found an alternative route, safer but longer, and retrieved the treat that way. She decided, my way was too dangerous. Marcus explained proudly. She found a better solution. That's not just intelligence, that's wisdom. Meanwhile, Lily had transformed her section into what looked like a classroom, where she was the student and Honey the bear was the teacher. She had set up various natural materials, stones, sticks, leaves, and shells, and was watching as Honey sorted them into categories only he understood. Bears have their own way of organizing the world, Lily explained to the fascinated delegates. Honey sorts things by smell, texture, and something else I haven't figured out yet. Maybe it's temperature or density. But look, he's consistent. He always puts the same things in the same groups. A delegation of hydrons, aquatic beings in environmental suits, burbled questions through their translators. The bear creature is categorizing. This suggests abstract thinking capability. Oh, Honey's super smart, Lily said matter-of-factly. He can count to at least 10, he knows about 40 different hand signals, and he's learned to use tools. Watch. She placed a honey-filled container on a high shelf, well out of Honey's reach. The bear cub studied the problem, then dragged over a box, positioned it carefully, climbed up, and retrieved his prize. But the best part, Lily continued, as Honey settled down to enjoy his treat, is that he learned this by watching me. I never trained him to stack things. He saw me do it once and figured out he could do it too. But it was David and Shadow who created the moment that changed everything. The 8-year-old had been quietly working with his leopard cub in a corner, practicing what looked like a dance. David would move and Shadow would mirror him. When David crouched, Shadow crouched. When David jumped, Shadow jumped. It was perfect synchronization, 2 different species moving as one. Council leader Zixitheta descended from their observation platform, their cloudy form rippling with what might have been curiosity. Small human, they addressed David. How is this synchronization achieved? David looked up, unintimidated by the ancient being towering over him. We practice every day, but it's not really practice. It's more like playing. Shadow and I, we just understand each other. When I'm sad, he knows. When he's scared, I know. We're connected. Show me, Zixitheta commanded. David nodded and sat down, closing his eyes. Shadow immediately pressed against him, also closing his eyes. They sat perfectly still for a moment, then David's hand moved slightly. Shadow's tail twitched in response. David smiled and Shadow began purring. It was subtle, but the connection was undeniable. This is impossible, Zixitheta stated, but their tone suggested wonder rather than disbelief. Different species cannot achieve this level of emotional synchronization. Humans can, Dr. Martinez spoke up for the first time. We've been doing it for thousands of years. We don't just tame animals, we invite them into our families. We share our lives with them. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, they choose to share their lives with us. A young Zalani, barely more than a geometric shimmer, floated forward. May I attempt interaction with one of the creatures? Maria looked at Storm, who was watching the crystalline being with interest. Storm, gentle, she said softly. The mountain lion moved forward slowly, each step calculated not to startle. He stopped just within reach and waited. The young Zalani extended what might have been an appendage, trembling slightly. Storm sniffed it delicately, then did something that made every being in the hall gasp. He lay down, making himself smaller, less threatening. It was an invitation. The Zalani touched Storm's fur, and their crystalline structure erupted in harmonics that needed no translation. It was pure joy. Storm purred in response, and suddenly the hall was filled with other young beings of various species, all wanting to experience this impossible trust between predator and prey. But the real breakthrough came when Commander Krell stood and walked to the center of the hall. The scarred warrior looked at the 4 children and their companions, then spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the vast space. The humans have shown us something we forgot, he said. Strength is not about domination. It is about choosing gentleness when you have the power to destroy. These children and their companions are warriors of a different kind. They fight fear with trust. They conquer isolation with love. He knelt before David and Shadow again, but this time, he removed his ceremonial blade and placed it on the ground. It was the Torgan gesture of absolute respect, reserved for acknowledged equals. Small warrior, he said to David, you and your shadow teacher have shown us a new form of courage. The hall erupted in various forms of applause, harmonics, bubbles, and light displays. The children looked at each other, confused by the fuss. To them, they had just been showing everyone their friends. They didn't understand that they had just revolutionized the galaxy's understanding of what humans really were. The universe learns to love dangerously. The transformation began small, as most revolutions do. A young Vrixie delegate returned to their homeworld carrying holographic recordings of storm-solving puzzles. Within days, Vrixie scientists were re-evaluating their entire understanding of predator intelligence. The crystalline Zalani composed mathematical equations to explain the emotional bonds they had witnessed, discovering that love might be a fundamental force they had somehow overlooked in their pursuit of pure logic. 3 weeks after the summit, Maya received a message that made her laugh out loud. The hydrons, the aquatic species who had fled in terror from Marcus's wolf pups, were requesting detailed information about establishing their own predator partnership program. They had apparently discovered that their ocean world harbored creatures remarkably similar to Earth's orcas, intelligent predators who had been avoided for millennia. But the real change came from an unexpected source. Commander Krell arrived at Earth with a delegation of young Torgan warriors, requesting to study at the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. The warriors, who had conquered star systems and fought battles across the galaxy, wanted to learn from human children how to befriend rather than dominate. Dr. Martinez welcomed them with the same warmth she showed everyone, though she privately admitted to Maya that watching 7-foot-tall scaled warriors sitting cross-legged while 10-year-old Marcus explained wolf pack dynamics was the strangest thing she had seen in 40 years of wildlife work. The Torgan warriors were surprisingly gentle students. They approached the animals with a reverence that bordered on religious, understanding instinctively that this was not about control but about earning trust. One young warrior named Vex formed a particular bond with an orphaned fox kit, carrying the tiny creature in a specially modified pouch and feeding it with a dedication that would have seemed impossible from a being who had once destroyed entire fleet formations. The summit's influence rippled outward like waves in a cosmic pond. The Zalani established the Interspecies Emotional Bond Institute, attempting to quantify and understand the connections they had witnessed. Their preliminary findings suggested that the capacity for cross-species empathy might be an indicator of advanced consciousness, immediately elevating humanity's status in academic circles. 6 months after the summit, something bittersweet happened. It was time for Storm to return to the wild. Maria had always known this day would come, had been preparing for it since the day she first held him as a tiny mewling cub. But knowing something and experiencing it were vastly different things. The release site was carefully chosen, a protected reserve where Storm could live as a wild mountain lion while still being monitored for his safety. The entire diplomatic community wanted to attend, turning what should have been a quiet farewell into an interstellar event. Representatives from 20 species gathered at the reserve's edge, maintaining respectful silence as Maria prepared to say goodbye. Storm seemed to sense the importance of the moment. He pressed against Maria's legs, purring in the deep, rumbling way that had comforted her as much as she had comforted him. She knelt and wrapped her arms around him one last time, whispering words that didn't need translation. Love transcended language. "You're ready," she told him, though her voice cracked. "You're going to be the best mountain lion ever, and maybe someday you'll have cubs of your own and you'll teach them everything I taught you and everything your mom would have taught you." Storm butted his head against her chin, a gesture of affection that made several alien delegates emit what their species considered crying. Then, with the dignity of a creature who knew exactly who he was, Storm walked toward the tree line. He paused once, looking back at Maria, and made a sound that wasn't quite a roar, wasn't quite a purr, but something uniquely theirs. "I love you too," Maria called out, and Storm disappeared into the forest where he belonged. The footage of that farewell spread across the galaxy faster than light. Billions of beings who had never heard of Earth suddenly understood something fundamental about humans. They could love something enough to let it go. They could raise a predator to be magnificent and then release it to its destiny, keeping only memories and the knowledge that they had made a difference. Marcus's wolf pups were released 2 months later, joining a pack in Yellowstone under careful supervision. The pack accepted them immediately, possibly because the pups approached with such confidence, clearly expecting to be welcomed. They had learned from Marcus that family was about choice, not just blood. Lily's bear, Honey, took longer to prepare for release. Bears were solitary creatures, and Honey needed to learn to be alone after months of companionship. The day he wandered into the wilderness, he did so carrying puzzle-solving skills that would make him the most innovative forager in the Rocky Mountains. Rangers would report for years afterward about a bear who seemed to understand tools in ways that shouldn't be possible. David held on to Shadow the longest, not because he wasn't ready to let go, but because Shadow needed extra time to develop his hunting skills. Leopards were among the most challenging predators to rehabilitate. But when the day finally came, Shadow proved he had learned well. He disappeared into the Amazon preserve like a ghost, but satellite tracking showed he established a territory, 3 times larger than average, as if he was keeping space for all the adventures David had told him about. The children were changed by the experience, but not in the way the adults expected. They didn't grieve indefinitely. Instead, they threw themselves into training the next generation of orphaned cubs that arrived at the center. Maria took on twin tiger cubs. Marcus worked with a group of coyote pups. Lily adopted an orphaned grizzly. David chose the impossible challenge of 3 bobcat kittens who seemed determined to redesign the entire facility. The galaxy watched and learned. Within a year, 17 different species had established their own wildlife bonding programs. The Torgans discovered that their world's apex predators, creatures they had hunted to near extinction, could be partners rather than enemies. The Seer, Zelani found that their crystalline structures could resonate with certain creatures, creating harmonics that resembled earth whale songs. But perhaps the most unexpected development came from the Vrixi. Those anxious, nervous beings discovered they had a remarkable gift for working with prey animals. Their natural vigilance made them perfect companions for creatures that needed to learn appropriate fear, while still trusting their caretakers. A young Vrixi named Thix became famous for raising a creature similar to earth deer, teaching it to survive in predator-rich environments while maintaining a bond that transcended species. 5 years after the summit, the Galactic Assembly convened again. This time, the human delegation was specifically requested to bring their newest group of children and companions. The hall that had once filled with fear now buzzed with excitement. Young beings of every species crowded forward to see what Earth had brought this time. 12-year-old James walked in with an eagle perched on his arm. 10-year-old Ash followed with a wolf-dog hybrid. 8-year-old Priya carried a fox kit. And 6-year-old Ben, the youngest ambassador Earth had ever sent, toddled in holding the leash of what appeared to be a very small, very determined badger. Council leader Zixitheta, their cloudy form rippling with what had been identified as amusement, descended to greet them. "Welcome, young humans. What lessons do you bring us this time?" Ben looked up at the ancient being with the fearlessness that only a 6-year-old could manage. "Mr. Stripey doesn't like vegetables," he announced seriously. "But he's learning to try them because I told him they're important. Sometimes doing things we don't like makes us stronger." The assembly hall filled with that universal sound of beings trying not to laugh at something adorable. But Zixitheta recognized the profound truth in the child's simple words. Humans didn't just teach animals to hunt or survive. They taught them to grow beyond their nature, to become more than instinct dictated. "The human children have given the galaxy a gift," Zixitheta announced to the assembly. "They have shown us that the greatest strength is the courage to be gentle, the greatest wisdom is knowing when to hold tight and when to let go, and the greatest power is the ability to see potential friends where others see only danger." As the new children began their demonstrations, Maria, now 17 and one of the center's junior instructors, watched from the observation deck. Storm was thriving in the wild, had even been spotted with a mate. The GPS tracker showed he had cubs of his own now, teaching them to hunt in the forest where she had released him. She understood something now that she hadn't 5 years ago. The galaxy had thought humans were dangerous because of their weapons and wars. But humans were dangerous for a completely different reason. They could look at the universe's most dangerous creatures and see not threats to be eliminated, but souls to be understood. They could offer their hearts to things that could destroy them and somehow convince those things to be gentle in return. Ambassador Maya Chen stood beside Maria, watching the new generation of children work their impossible magic. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Letting Storm go?" Maria smiled, her eyes carrying wisdom beyond her 17 years. "How can I regret giving him his freedom? That was always the goal. The love doesn't end just because the physical presence does. Every time a ranger sends footage of Storm teaching his cubs to hunt, I know a piece of my heart is out there in the wild, making the world more magnificent." Below them, 6-year-old Ben was attempting to teach his badger to share treats with a young Vrixi. The badger, clearly skeptical of this entire arrangement, was nevertheless making an effort because Ben asked him to. The Vrixie child, trembling with excitement and fear in equal measure, slowly extended what passed for its hand. The badger sniffed it, then very carefully, very gently, placed a small piece of fruit in the alien child's palm. The watching delegates erupted in celebration, but Ben just nodded seriously. Good job, Mr. Stripey. Sharing is hard, but you did it. Dr. Martinez had been invited to speak at universities across the galaxy, explaining the philosophy behind their program. She always began the same way. We don't create the bonds, we just create the space where bonds can form. The magic happens when two different species look at each other and choose to trust. The Torgan warrior Vex had returned to his homeworld with the Fox Kit, now grown, and established the first Torgan Wildlife Harmony Center. Warriors who had once competed to kill the most dangerous creatures now competed to raise the most challenging, orphans. Their military academy added a new course, strategic empathy and interspecies tactical bonding. The Zilani had made the most unexpected discovery. Their research showed that the emotional bonds formed between species created quantum entanglements at the subatomic level. Love, they announced with the kind of excitement only crystalline mathematicians could achieve, was literally a force that connected living beings across space and time. Maria's connection to Storm wasn't just emotional, it was written into the fabric of reality itself. The Hydrans successfully established communication with their ocean predators, discovering that these creatures had been trying to communicate for centuries but had been ignored out of fear. The first translated message from a creature similar to Earth's orcas was simple: "We have been waiting for you to stop running away." As the years passed, Earth became known not as the warrior planet or the dangerous newcomer, but as the teacher world. Species from across the galaxy sent their young to learn the art of impossible friendships. The Rocky Mountain Wildlife Rehabilitation Center expanded into a global network, with facilities on every continent and partnerships with similar centers on 40 different worlds. Marcus, now 21 and a full instructor, developed the Universal Bonding Protocol, a guide for any species attempting to form connections with their world's predators. The first rule was simple: approach with love, not control. Offer trust, don't demand it. Be prepared to have your heart broken because all good things must be free to leave. Lily, 19 and studying xenobiology, discovered that the puzzle-solving techniques she had developed with honey could be adapted for any species. Her research showed that play, that seemingly simple act of joyful interaction, was the universal bridge between species. When beings played together, barriers dissolved. David, 18 and the quiet philosopher of the group, wrote a book that became required reading in diplomatic courses across the galaxy. The Predator's Heart, Lessons from Shadow, explored the paradox of strength through gentleness. His conclusion resonated with billions. We feared the predators because we saw only their teeth and claws. We never noticed their capacity for loyalty, their ability to choose kindness, their willingness to love something weaker than themselves. The final chapter of David's book contained a single image, a photograph taken by a wildlife camera in the Amazon. It showed Shadow, now a magnificent adult leopard teaching his own cubs to hunt. But in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was something extraordinary. Shadow had returned to the exact spot where David had released him, bringing his cubs to the place where he had learned that humans could be trusted. 10 years after that first summit, humanity's position in the galaxy had transformed completely. They were no longer the species to be watched with suspicion, but the ones others turned to when they needed to understand the impossible. When two species were in conflict, human mediators were requested not because of their military might, but because they understood how to build bridges between natural enemies. The greatest moment came when the Galactic Assembly voted unanimously to adopt what they called the Earth Protocol. Every member species would establish programs to connect their young with their world's wildlife, especially the dangerous creatures they had long feared. It was recognized that a species that could only see danger could never truly see beauty. Council leader Zixtheta, ancient and wise, made the closing statement at that historic assembly. The humans have taught us that evolution is not just about survival of the fittest. It's about the brave choice to be gentle when you could be cruel, to nurture when you could dominate, to love when you could fear. They have shown us that the most advanced civilization is not the one with the greatest weapons, but the one with the greatest capacity to see friends where others see only enemies. As the assembly concluded, a message arrived from Earth. It was a video from the newest class of children at the rehabilitation center. A 4-year-old girl named Emma, named after the original Maria's middle name, was bottle-feeding a tiger cub, just as Maria had done years before. But this time she was surrounded by young beings from a dozen different species, all learning together how to love something dangerous. The camera panned across the scene. A young Torgan warrior cradling a bear cub, a Vrixie child playing with wolf pups, a crystalline Zelani resonating with an eagle's cry, a Hydron in a modified suit swimming with river otters, and in the center, little Emma looked up at the camera with a grin missing 2 front teeth. "We're teaching them to be wild," she announced proudly. "But first, we're teaching them to be loved." The galaxy had asked humanity to prove they were harmless. Instead, humanity had proven something far more important, that with enough love, enough patience, and enough trust, anything could become harmless. Even humans. Even the universe's deadliest predators. Even fear itself. In the end, the children hadn't just brought their pets to a diplomatic summit. They had brought a revolution wrapped in fur and claws, disguised as innocence, powered by the most dangerous force in the universe. Love without conditions. The stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter, knowing that somewhere in the cosmos a human child was teaching a predator to be gentle, and in return learning what it truly meant to be strong.